The detour that wasn't in the script. The winding two-lane road stretched through golden fields that waved like ocean tides under the late afternoon sun. Somewhere in the middle of nowhere, the GPS lost its signal, the cell towers disappeared, and the modern world faded behind the slow-moving silhouettes of barns, pickup trucks, and distant grain silos. Keanu Reeves sat quietly in the passenger seat of the vintage turquoise Ford Bronco they had rented for this unplanned getaway, something simple, something humble, something far from red carpets and flashing cameras. Sandra Bullock, her sunglasses slipping down her nose, squinted ahead as she drove, amused by the growing emptiness around them. There was no crew, no security, no assistant giving them updates. Just two actors, two old friends, with decades between them, decades of shared moments, missed chances, and unspoken what-ifs. "Are you sure this is the right way?" she asked, a teasing grin forming on her face. Keanu leaned forward, tapping the dusty old map they had found in the glove box. "I think we passed right past the highway turn an hour ago, but hey, who needs directions when you have destiny?" She laughed, that laugh, rich, honest, a little tired, filled the cabin of the Bronco like music. "You're such a poet when we're lost." They hadn't planned to come here. In fact, they hadn't planned much at all. The world had been spinning too fast lately, press junkets, streaming contracts, political controversies, social media storms. They had been at the same awards gala the night before in Chicago. Amid the glitter and the gowns, Keanu had whispered to her, "Let's go somewhere, just drive, you and me, no agents, no schedule." And she had said yes without a second thought. Now here they were, deep in the heart of a town not even marked on most maps, Crescent Ridge. One blinking stoplight, a main street with a hardware store, a diner, and one tiny little shop with hand-painted lettering that simply read, "Nora's Place since 1961. The Bronco rolled to a slow stop in front of the shop, tires crunching gravel. Keanu stepped out first, pulling off his sunglasses and taking a deep breath of the warm autumn air. The scent of old wood, cinnamon, and something floral, lavender or maybe wild roses, drifted from the shop's open window. Sandra climbed out too, her eyes drifting across the dusty storefront. "You think they sell coffee in there?" "I think they sell stories," Keanu said softly. The bell above the door jingled as they stepped inside. The space was small and intimate, filled with shelves of handmade candles, books with frayed spines, old records in wooden crates, and delicate ornaments that looked like they had been loved by time itself. An old woman, maybe in her 80s, stood behind the counter, polishing a ceramic angel with careful, reverent hands. Her silver hair was pinned back in a loose bun, and her eyes, sharp but warm, lifted when she saw them. Sandra smiled first. "Hi, sorry if we're intruding." The woman looked at them for a long second, and then her eyes widened, not with shock, but with quiet recognition. She didn't gasp, didn't scream, didn't reach for a camera. Instead, she smiled with the kind of grace that only comes from someone who's seen a lot and no longer chases fame. "You're not intruding," she said kindly. "You're exactly where you're supposed to be." There was a strange stillness that followed, a kind of weight in the air like something had shifted. Keanu stepped closer to the shelves, running his fingers across the spines of old poetry books. "This place is beautiful." "Thank you," the woman replied. "It used to be my mother's, then mine. Now it belongs to the memories." Sandra noticed a photograph on the wall behind the counter. It was black and white, faded at the edges, but clear enough to show a soldier in uniform standing beside a young girl holding a teddy bear, both smiling in front of the very same shop. The caption beneath the frame said, "Tommy and Nora, July 1967. "What happened to them?" Sandra asked gently, pointing to the picture. The old woman paused, then as if turning a page in her mind, she spoke softly. "Tommy was my brother. He left for Vietnam 2 weeks after that photo. He never came back. But every year on this day, I light a candle for him, and I place his photo in the window. That's all he ever wanted, never to be forgotten." A silence fell. It wasn't awkward, it was sacred. Keanu stepped forward, his voice low. "May we light the candle with you?" The woman blinked, touched, perhaps surprised. "You would do that?" Sandra nodded. "Absolutely, we're honored." And so, without fanfare or flashing phones, the three of them stood near the window as the woman lit a small white candle and placed it next to Tommy's photo. The flame flickered gently, casting a warm glow across the frame. Outside, a breeze rustled the fading leaves. Inside, something unspoken passed between them, a moment of shared humanity untouched by ego, fame, or pretense. "I used to believe no one remembered anymore," the woman whispered. That the world was too busy chasing screens and forgetting souls. Keanu reached out and gently held her hand. Not today. As they left the shop that evening, the sun dipping low over the amber horizon, Sandra glanced back one last time. In the front window, Tommy's photo now sat beside the candle, and next to it, a small note scribbled in delicate script. Today, two strangers made my brother feel remembered again. What they didn't know was that the woman's niece would post about it that night, sharing the photo and the story on a small Facebook group for veterans' families. Within days, it would go viral, not because it involved celebrities, but because it reminded people of something too often lost in the rush of the world. That kindness still matters. That memory is a form of love. That even in the smallest towns, in the simplest moments, something extraordinary can happen. And it had only just begun. The girl with the broken radio. The night air in Crescent Ridge was thick with the scent of wood smoke and memory. After leaving Nora's little shop, Keanu and Sandra didn't speak for a while. They just drove. The old Bronco hummed along the empty country road, its headlights painting long, lazy beams across fences and open fields, occasionally catching the glint of deer eyes or a lone mailbox forgotten under the stars. The silence between them wasn't empty, it was full of reflection. Sometimes the most meaningful conversations happen without a single word, just two souls sitting close in the stillness, breathing in the same moment and letting it hold them. The stars were unbelievably bright. Unchoked by city haze, they scattered like diamonds over a velvet sky. Sandra glanced over, her voice soft but certain. That candlelight moment, I'll carry it for a long time. Keanu nodded, his gaze still on the road. Yeah, that kind of thing, it roots you. Reminds you we're all just passing through, but every moment has weight if we're paying attention. The Bronco turned into a gravel path that curved gently past a large open field, and in the distance they saw a flicker of color. A small fairground, barely lit, barely alive. Maybe 10 people milled around a carousel that creaked with age, and there was the distant sound of an off-key piano or maybe a music box. The kind of place that wasn't meant to impress, only to exist, quietly, simply, like a whisper of joy for those willing to notice it. They parked near a rickety wooden sign that read, Crescent Ridge Fall Festival, donations welcome. It wasn't even on Google Maps, just a tiny local gathering, the kind you only found by accident, and sometimes the best parts of life were the ones never planned. As they walked past the booths, homemade pies, knitted scarves, jars of honey, Sandra stopped suddenly. Her eyes landed on a girl, no older than 12, sitting beside a folding table with a cardboard sign that said fixing radios, free or trade. The girl had grease on her cheeks, a tool belt bigger than her waist, and eyes too old for someone that young. Keanu crouched beside the table, intrigued. You fix radios? He asked, his tone curious but warm. The girl looked up, barely fazed. If they've got soul left in them, I try. Sandra tilted her head. What do you mean soul? The girl pointed to a rusted portable radio on the table. Some radios are just plastic. You can fix them 100 times and they'll still sound hollow. But the old ones, the ones with soul, you can feel it when they start humming again, like they're grateful. Keanu chuckled gently. You talk about radios like most people talk about their dogs. The girl shrugged. Well, people don't always listen. Radios do, and when they break, they're just waiting for someone to believe in them again. Sandra was silent for a beat. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a dusty, broken Walkman she'd kept as a memento from her first film set. She didn't know why she still carried it. Maybe nostalgia, maybe guilt, maybe hope. She placed it on the table. What about this one? The girl picked it up carefully, turning it in her hands like it was glass. This one's got a story, she murmured. You can tell by the way the screws are stripped and the battery door is taped shut. Someone didn't want to let go of it. The three of them stayed while the girl worked, her small hands moving with surprising precision, her brow furrowed, her tongue sticking out slightly at the corner of her mouth. 30 minutes passed, maybe more. The fair behind them buzzed faintly, laughter, music, the spin of a Ferris wheel. But here, at this folding table under a single yellow bulb, it felt like the universe had paused. The girl finally clicked the casing shut and pressed play. For a second, nothing happened. Then a faint warble, static. A crackle and then music, grainy, imperfect, but unmistakably alive. A 90s track Sandra hadn't heard in years, one of her early film's soundtracks. Her breath caught. Keanu leaned back, his face glowing with something softer than admiration. Reverence, maybe. You brought it back to life. The girl looked proud but not surprised. I just reminded it what it was made for. Sandra crouched beside her and gently asked, What's your name? The girl hesitated. Lacey. Lacey, do you do this every year? Keanu asked. Lacey shook her head. Only tonight. My dad's working late shifts at the mill and I wanted to do something useful, something that makes people smile. Sandra placed a hand on her shoulder. You're not just useful, Lacey, you're remarkable. Suddenly, from behind them, a soft voice interrupted. Excuse me, is that Keanu Reeves? A boy in a wheelchair, maybe 16, rolled toward them slowly. His face was thin, eyes curious, hopeful. Lacey stood up immediately. Tyler, I told you to wait till I was done. But Tyler was already looking at Keanu like he had stepped out of a dream. You came here to Crescent Ridge? Keanu smiled and stepped closer. I think Crescent Ridge called us. We just listened. The boy's hands trembled slightly as he reached into his lap and held out a drawing, an old sketch of Neo from The Matrix, hand-drawn, worn at the edges, but detailed with care. I made this for you when I was 10. Never thought I'd get the chance to give it. Keanu took it with both hands like it was made of gold. You just made my night. Sandra wiped her eye, trying to play it cool, but the moment was too pure, too raw. Then Lacey added softly, he watches your movies when he's in the hospital, said it makes him feel brave. Keanu crouched next to Tyler, placed a hand on his shoulder and whispered something just for him, something that made the boy's whole body light up. No one else heard the words, but everyone could feel the power of them. Before they left, Keanu asked, do you two have dinner plans? Lacey blinked. We were just gonna head home. Why? Sandra smiled. Because there's a pie booth over there with our name on it, and I think heroes deserve dessert. That night, under strings of flickering lights, at a plastic table with 2 paper plates of cherry pie and lukewarm cider, 4 people sat together. 2 Hollywood legends, a girl who believed radios had souls, and a boy who believed in courage because he had no other choice. The world outside kept spinning. But for one small-town evening in Crescent Ridge, time held its breath and watched love, kindness, and quiet miracles unfold. The piano in the corner, no one played. The next morning, the sun rose slow and golden over Crescent Ridge, brushing soft light across worn rooftops and dew-covered fields. There was a serenity to this town, the kind that couldn't be replicated by luxury resorts or 5-star getaways. This was the kind of peace that lived in the bones of a place, the kind built over decades of early morning coffees, church bells, hand-painted signs, and neighbors who remembered birthdays. Keanu and Sandra had stayed overnight in a modest roadside inn, a faded structure called the Ridgeview, run by a retired couple who didn't seem to own a television but still remembered Sandra's breakout role in Speed. They had no idea what Keanu's last movie was, but offered him extra syrup on his pancakes anyway, because he looked like a man who needed sweet things. It was the kind of place where you didn't need to be famous to be seen. You just had to show up with a kind face. After breakfast, they walked, not with security, not with phones out, just 2 people strolling like they had all the time in the world. Sandra had tied her hair up in a loose bun and thrown on an old denim jacket. Keanu wore a baseball cap and sunglasses that couldn't disguise the kindness etched in his posture. They wandered past the post office, the barber shop, the feed store, and finally stopped when they reached the old community center. Its red bricks were cracked, vines climbing its sides, a rusted banner that read Open Mic Saturdays flapping gently in the breeze. But today was Saturday, and yet the door was slightly open. Sandra pushed it gently. Inside, the scent of dust and wood polish lingered in the air. Folding chairs were stacked high, and the floor creaked with memory. But what caught their eye was the piano in the far corner, an old upright with chipped keys and a frame that had likely seen better decades. It stood in the light of a single stained glass window, untouched but proud, like an elder watching over a silent room. Keanu walked to it, trailing his fingers along the edge, as if asking for permission before touching it. I used to play, he murmured, long before everything else. Sandra looked at him, surprised. You never told me that, he smiled, a little embarrassed. I wasn't good, but it used to help. When my sister was sick and the world felt too loud, I'd play until my hands hurt. It was the only way I could talk without getting the words wrong. He sat on the worn bench, touched the keys, and a broken G-note rang out like a groan. He laughed quietly. Definitely out of tune. Sandra sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders brushed. Play anyway, she whispered. Broken doesn't mean voiceless. And so he did, not perfectly, not with flourish or showmanship, but with truth. The melody was hesitant, then steadier, then trembling with old memory. Sandra closed her eyes, letting the sound wrap around her like a shawl. She remembered nights on set when their trailers were parked side by side, and Keanu would be the last one awake, reading some book about physics or philosophy, and she'd fall asleep to the sound of him softly humming something she never recognized. She remembered now, it was this melody. As he played, a quiet cough echoed from the hallway. They both turned. A boy stood there, 16, maybe 17, leaning against the frame. He wore a janitor's shirt 2 sizes too big and held a mop in one hand. His face was thin, cautious, and marked with the kind of hesitation that comes from too many doors closed too early. "Sorry," he said quickly. "I was just cleaning. I didn't mean to spy." Keanu smiled gently, still resting his fingers on the keys. "You weren't spying. You were listening." "That's the rare part." The boy stepped in slowly. "You're Keanu Reeves, right?" "Sometimes," Keanu replied with a wink. Sandra chimed in. "And sometimes he's just the guy who can't hit a G sharp without making it cry." The boy chuckled softly. "That piano, it used to belong to my grandma. She donated it here before she passed. No one plays it anymore." Keanu's face shifted into something softer. "She had good taste. It's got soul." The boy looked down, his voice quieter now. "She used to say every song is a story and every key is a sentence. But I don't know how to tell stories like that." Sandra stood up and gestured to the bench. "Then maybe today's the day you start." The boy hesitated. "I don't know how to play." Keanu looked at him. "Neither did I once. Sit with me." The boy moved slowly like he wasn't sure if this was real. He sat beside Keanu, knees bouncing nervously. Keanu placed his hands over the boys and guided them gently to the keys. "It's not about getting it right. It's about showing up, about listening to what wants to come through." And then together they pressed down. One note, then another, a broken, imperfect chord, but somehow it still meant something. For the next half hour, the community center filled with the sound of learning, not just piano notes, but trust being born. A stranger telling a boy he mattered. A moment no one would film, no headlines, no viral video, just one seed planted in the heart of someone who had been invisible too long. Afterward, the boy stood, cheeks flushed. "Thank you," he said. "Most people, they don't see me unless I'm mopping up after them." Sandra stepped forward. "Today, we saw you first, before the mop." "Before the silence," Keanu added, "and next time I want to hear your story on these keys." They left the community center to find the sky had turned overcast, clouds rolling in like quiet thunderheads. But their hearts were warm, their spirits brighter than any sun. They hadn't planned any of this, not the shop, not the fair, not the piano, but that was the strange thing about detours. They often take you exactly where your soul was always meant to go. As they walked back toward the Bronco, the old couple from the inn waved from across the street. A young mother passed by pushing a stroller and smiled. Someone honked from a rusted pickup, not in recognition of their fame, but in the way locals do when they see kindness walking around in human form. That afternoon, a quiet shift began in Crescent Ridge. The girl with the radios told her father what had happened and asked if she could start teaching other kids how to fix things. The boy at the piano sat alone after dinner, sketching notes on paper for the first time. Nora lit another candle and placed a new photo in the shop window, one of Sandra and Keanu holding a cherry pie beside 2 kids beaming like the world had finally seen them. And Keanu, sitting beside Sandra on the hood of the Bronco that evening, whispered, "I think we're not just stopping in this town, Sandy. I think this town is waking us up." Sandra didn't reply with words. She just leaned her head on his shoulder, closed her eyes, and let the wind tell its story across the fields. The forgotten photo in the attic. Rain arrived like a secret that morning, slow at first, as if unsure whether it should interrupt the peace that had settled over Crescent Ridge. The clouds hung low, their edges smudged like charcoal over the hills, and the soft patter on the window glass at the Ridgeview Inn was the only sound that filled the air before sunrise. Keanu had woken early, not out of habit, but out of something deeper, an ache in his chest that had nothing to do with pain and everything to do with stillness. He stared out at the mist rolling over the fields, shirt half-buttoned, a cup of coffee cooling in his hand, watching the world exhale before it truly began. Sandra stirred quietly in the next room, padding barefoot across the creaky wood floor, drawn by the aroma of fresh coffee and something else she couldn't name. She stepped beside him, took the mug from his hand without a word, and sipped. He didn't complain. She never asked permission with him, and he never needed to offer it. They simply understood. Some friendships grow in the cracks between moments. Theirs had become a cathedral of unspoken trust. "You ever wonder what your life would have looked like if you never took the first role?" Sandra finally asked, her voice almost a whisper, lost somewhere between the steam of the coffee and the sound of distant crows. Keanu's gaze didn't shift. "All the time, I think I'd still be trying to find stories, maybe not on screen, maybe not in words, but in people. I've always believed people carry the real scripts." He turned to her. "And you?" Sandra smiled faintly. "I think I'd still be running. But slower, maybe through a life that was quiet and unfinished, maybe through a town like this." Later that morning, with the rain thinning to a light drizzle, they decided to explore the back of the inn. The owners, Ruth and Jim, had invited them to see the attic, not because it was grand or beautiful, but because it's where our history lives if you're the type who cares about that sort of thing. And they were. The attic was cramped, lined with boxes, faded books, trunks with brass latches, and a heavy smell of cedar and thyme. Light spilled in through a single round window, catching motes of dust dancing like quiet spirits in the air. Keanu carefully opened a chest filled with yellowed newspapers and brittle theater programs from the 1960s. Sandra discovered a photo album wrapped in a lace cloth, its leather cracked but its pages lovingly preserved. They sat cross-legged on the wooden floor, thumbing through images of strangers whose faces somehow felt familiar, smiles frozen in time, laughter that once echoed but now only whispered through silver gelatin prints. About 20 pages in, Sandra stopped, her brow furrowed. "Wait," she said softly, her finger tapping the edge of a photograph. It showed a young woman, elegant, poised, standing outside Nora's place with a man in uniform, not Tommy. This man looked older. In the corner, scribbled in elegant cursive, "Margaret and Officer Collins, May 1965. Keanu leaned in, recognizing something in the posture of the man, not the face, but the way he stood, like he carried weight not visible to others. "He looks like he's hiding something," Keanu said thoughtfully. Sandra nodded. "Or someone hiding from something." They took the album downstairs and showed it to Ruth, who gasped softly when she saw the photo. "My heavens," she murmured, touching the image like it might crumble. "That's Margaret, Nora's sister." She was a pianist, played for every church wedding in this county. But Collins, Ruth hesitated, glancing at Keanu. "That man was a mystery. One day he came to town, offered to help Nora after Tommy died. Then one night he vanished. No one knew why." Sandra leaned forward, instinctive now, the actress giving way to the woman who cared about the untold. "Do you know where Margaret is now?" Ruth looked out the rain-spattered window, eyes distant. "Still here, sort of. She lives in the old care home on Sycamore Hill. Doesn't speak much anymore. Alzheimer's took her words, but sometimes she plays the piano." That afternoon, Keanu and Sandra drove to the care home. It wasn't grand, just a one-story building with chipped paint and a garden filled with rusted wind chimes. The receptionist recognized them immediately but didn't react with the usual frenzy. She simply said, "She's in the rec room. You're welcome to visit. She might not remember her name, but she never forgot music." Inside, Margaret sat at an old upright piano, her frail fingers hovering above the keys, pausing now and then like she was asking permission from ghosts. Her hair was white, her frame small, but her presence filled the space like sunlight. Sandra approached slowly and knelt beside her. "Hello, Margaret, we saw your photo. You're beautiful." Margaret didn't look at her, but she began to play. The melody was haunting, delicate and uneven, but full of emotion. Keanu stood still, frozen, the notes clawing at something buried deep inside, and then it hit him. The tune. It was the same melody he had been trying to remember for years, the one his sister had played on cassette in her hospital bed before she passed. The one he'd tried to mimic on every piano he ever found but could never quite capture. His throat tightened. His hands trembled. And without realizing it, he knelt on the floor beside Sandra, tears brimming. "She's playing my sister's song," he whispered. The caregiver nearby gasped. "She never plays for anyone," she said. "Only on rainy days and only that one song." Sandra touched Margaret's hand gently. "Do you remember who taught you this?" Margaret's fingers faltered, her lips parted, and in a voice like old lace unraveling, she whispered, "Collins, he wrote it for me before he disappeared." They sat with her for hours, not trying to fix anything, not trying to understand everything, just letting the music be what it was, a bridge between lives, between decades, between griefs that had never fully said goodbye. Before leaving, Keanu pressed the photo they had brought from the attic gently into Margaret's lap. She looked down, touched the faces with her fingers, and smiled the kind of smile that lives between forgetting and remembering. As they walked out into the clearing sky, the air smelled of wet earth and second chances. Keanu looked over his shoulder at the care home and said softly, "You think we're here by accident, Sandy?" She shook her head, no hesitation. "No, this isn't a trip. This is a pilgrimage for something we didn't know we lost." That night back at the inn, Keanu sat by the fire with the album on his lap. Sandra poured 2 glasses of red wine and joined him on the rug. The wind howled gently outside, but inside, the warmth wrapped around them like a promise. A promise that some journeys are meant to find not just new places, but the forgotten parts of ourselves we didn't know we needed to heal. The letter hidden in the floorboards. The following day unfolded with a golden softness that felt almost intentional, as if the sky itself had been watching everything unfold and decided, just for today, to offer Crescent Ridge its best. The clouds had vanished, replaced by sunlight that poured gently through the windows of the Ridgeview Inn, illuminating every crack and wrinkle on the old wooden floors like lines on a well-loved face. The world outside seemed to breathe slower in this town, as if the clocks here moved not by minutes or hours, but by emotions, shaped by the quiet rituals of pie baking, window washing, and stories told between sips of coffee. Keanu Reeves sat on the front porch of the inn, quietly tying the laces of his boots, his mind still playing the piano tune Margaret had offered them like a parting gift the day before. He hadn't told Sandra yet, but something about that melody had stirred a memory so old, so deep, that it almost frightened him. It wasn't just his sister's song. It was older than that. It was tied to something else, something he couldn't name. He just knew that when Margaret played it, he didn't feel like a man in a small town. He felt like a child again, a boy sitting on the floor of a darkened hallway while music drifted from the room down the hall, a lullaby or maybe a secret. Sandra stepped out with 2 mugs of fresh coffee, her hair a little wild from sleep, wearing one of the oversized flannel shirts she had bought from the thrift store across from Nora's place. She looked effortlessly beautiful, not because she was trying, but because she was. She handed him the mug and sat beside him without speaking, letting the warmth of the sun and the moment do the talking. When she finally did speak, it wasn't about yesterday or the care home or even the town. It was about the silence between them. "You know," she said, not looking at him, "this is the first time I've felt still in years." Keanu turned slightly, sipping from the mug. "Yeah, me too. It's like this place isn't just quiet, it's listening." They decided to visit Nora again, not because they had to, but because something kept pulling them back to that little shop. Nora greeted them as if she had known they were coming all along, her frail hands already holding a paper bag with 2 freshly baked scones and a small note tucked between them. "You'll need these today," she said, her eyes twinkling with mystery. Keanu tilted his head. "Why today?" Nora didn't answer directly. She never did. She only smiled and said, "Because stories have a way of finding their final chapter when the readers are ready." They wandered through town for a while, eventually returning to the community center, which had been left open by the janitor boy from the piano, Noah, as they had since learned. Inside, the sunlight was thick and golden, filtering through the high windows and catching the dust like a gentle snowfall. The old upright piano stood silent, but the room was full of presence. As Sandra moved toward the back of the hall, she noticed a loose board in the stage platform, just slightly raised, like it was begging to be noticed. She knelt and pried it up, revealing a small metal tin, rusted at the edges but clearly cherished. She looked up at Keanu, who had already walked over. Wordlessly, he reached down and helped her lift it. Inside the tin was a folded envelope, aged and yellowed. The name scrawled on the front, "To Margaret if I don't come back." Sandra inhaled sharply. "It's from Collins." Carefully, with reverence, she opened the envelope. The ink had faded, but the words still held weight. "My dearest Margaret, if you're reading this, it means the world found a way to keep me from coming back to you. But I need you to know, I never lied when I said your music was the only truth I ever believed in. I wasn't just an officer. I was a man running from the war inside myself. But when you played that melody, I found peace I'd never known. If I don't make it, promise me you'll keep playing, even if your hands tremble, even if no one listens. Promise me you'll let the music speak when I no longer can. All my love. Edward Collins." Sandra pressed the letter to her chest, her voice catching. She waited her whole life and never knew he left this. Keanu nodded, the back of his hand brushing his cheek. He didn't vanish. He tried to come back, but the world got in the way. They knew immediately what they had to do. That evening, with the help of Ruth, Jim, and Noah, they arranged a small gathering at the community center. Nothing grand, no announcements. Just a few locals, Lacey and her father, young Tyler in his chair, Nora from her shop, and a handful of others who had started to notice something changing in the town, something soft and sacred. At the center of the room stood Margaret, brought in by her nurse, dressed in a shawl of soft gray and blue. She looked around, a little confused at first, until Keanu walked up and placed the letter in her hands. The room was silent as she opened it. Her eyes scanned the words slowly, and then she wept. Not loud, not wild, but with a quiet intensity that made everyone in the room feel like they were witnessing something holy. And then, as if guided by instinct, she walked to the piano. Her hands trembled, but she played. This time, the melody was whole, strong, clear. It filled the room like a heartbeat that had been waiting decades to return. Sandra watched through tears, her hand clutching Keanu's. And as the final note lingered in the air like incense, Nora whispered from the back, "You brought him home." That night, as the stars returned over Crescent Ridge, Keanu and Sandra sat on the porch once more, this time with the town's quiet echoing inside them. Not the sounds, but the feeling, of something old being made new, of something broken being made whole. And in that stillness, Sandra finally asked, "Do you ever think maybe this was the role we were meant for all along?" Keanu turned, his eyes softer than ever. "Not a role, Sandy, just who we are when the world stops watching." When the cameras returned, they stayed silent. The next morning brought with it an almost eerie stillness, not the absence of sound, but the presence of peace, as if the town of Crescent Ridge was holding its breath. It wasn't the kind of silence that felt empty. It was full, as if every tree, every porch step, every dusty window pane remembered what had happened the night before. Margaret's hands, trembling yet steady, had played a final note that echoed far beyond the piano. It had awakened something, not only in her but in every person who had been quietly mourning something they couldn't name. Grief, lost love, forgotten purpose. All of it had a place in that room, and now it had finally been heard. Keanu stood at the edge of the field behind the inn, looking out at the sloping hills, his silhouette framed by the golden light of early morning. He wasn't wearing anything that would identify him as a movie star. No sunglasses, no cap, no designer jacket. Just a man in jeans and boots, hands in his pockets, eyes quietly scanning the distance like he was searching for something not yet visible. Behind him, the inn's screen door creaked open and closed again. Sandra approached slowly, sipping from a chipped white mug, still warm from the coffee Ruth had brewed just before dawn. She stood beside him without a word, as they had grown so used to doing in these last few days, the silence between them more intimate than any scripted dialogue they'd ever delivered on screen. He finally spoke, voice low and raw like the sound of gravel underfoot. "It's strange. We came here running from noise, but what we found was louder than anything I've heard in years." Sandra smiled, her eyes misting. "Sometimes the quiet carries the truth. You just have to stop performing long enough to hear it." They stood there for a long moment, just the two of them, alone with the wind and the light and the memory of everything Crescent Ridge had shown them. Then Keanu reached into the pocket of his jacket and pulled out something small, a folded newspaper clipping. He handed it to her. It was from the local Crescent Gazette, a black and white photo from the night before, Margaret at the piano, head bowed, eyes closed. The headline read, "She played his melody after 60 years and he finally came home." Below it was a short article written by Lacey, the radio-fixing girl who had asked to write the story for her school paper, but ended up getting it printed in the town's weekly edition. Her words were simple, honest, and powerful. She wrote about how kindness could travel farther than Wi-Fi signals, how healing didn't need permission, and how sometimes the greatest performances happen when no one is watching. Sandra folded the paper gently and tucked it into her jacket. She's got more truth in one paragraph than most of Hollywood does in a full script. Later that morning, their peace was interrupted, not by the townspeople, but by something far more intrusive. News had finally reached the outside world. Photos of Keanu and Sandra had made their way online. A grainy snapshot of them standing in front of Nora's shop. A shaky video of Keanu kneeling beside the piano with a local boy. Whispers had turned to headlines. Reporters were already circling nearby towns, trying to locate the exact coordinates of Crescent Ridge. The town had been discovered. Ruth approached them quietly, holding a cordless phone in her hand. "Honey, someone from Los Angeles called, said you've got 20 missed messages. The press is looking for a quote. They want to know why you're here." Sandra took the phone, looked at it for a long beat, then gently set it back on the porch table. "Tell them we're not here to give answers," she said. "We're here to listen." By noon, 2 black SUVs with tinted windows pulled into the town square. Assistants, publicists, a low-level security team dispatched by someone back in California who had finally tracked their location through a tagged Instagram post. The moment they stepped out of the vehicle, it felt like the atmosphere changed, like someone had turned off the record player during your favorite song. The town looked up. Children stopped playing. The baker paused mid-roll. Even Nora's place dimmed slightly behind its windows, as if the old soul of the town was unsure what to do next. Keanu and Sandra stood on the sidewalk side by side as one of the assistants approached. "Mr. Reeves, Ms. Bullock, we need to get you both back. There's a reshoot scheduled. There's press demanding an explanation. There are headlines spinning rumors. You've been off-grid for 6 days. Keanu's jaw tightened. "Good," the assistant blinked. "I'm sorry." "I said good," Keanu repeated, eyes never leaving the horizon. "If the world can't understand silence, maybe it needs more of it." Sandra stepped forward. "We're not finished here yet. Tell them we'll talk when there's something worth saying." The assistants exchanged awkward glances. They didn't understand. This wasn't a stunt. This wasn't about a viral comeback or a secret film. This was about human beings rediscovering their humanity. Later that evening, Keanu and Sandra walked down Main Street one last time, knowing in their bones that their moment in Crescent Ridge was drawing to a close. They passed the diner, where Tyler was now helping bus tables and telling everyone about how Keanu Reeves had taught him the power of a whisper. They waved at Lacey, who had turned her radio repair table into a full Saturday workshop with 10 other kids soldering wires and testing speakers. They stopped briefly at Nora's place. She handed them each a small package. Inside, a candle molded from wax gathered over the last 60 years. "To remind you," she said, "that light doesn't need a spotlight to be seen." They returned to the community center for one final night. No audience, no lights, just the two of them and the piano. Sandra sat on the bench first this time. She placed her hands over the keys and hesitated. "Play," Keanu whispered. "Even if your hands tremble." She did, and he joined her. No one recorded it, no one posted it. It was just theirs, just that moment. Just the echo of what happens when two hearts stop trying to be seen and start simply being. When they left Crescent Ridge the next morning, they didn't tell anyone. They didn't pack with ceremony. They just got in the Bronco and drove, but behind them the town carried their footprints. The photo in Nora's window now included them. The piano at the center had been tuned. A new bench had been placed beside it. Margaret had asked to visit every week. The boy who mopped the floors now ran music sessions for kids whose voices trembled. And the world continued spinning, faster, louder, messier. But for those who had felt what happened in Crescent Ridge, nothing would ever be quite the same. Because in a forgotten town, a man known for action and a woman known for laughter reminded everyone that the most powerful stories are the ones no one plans, and the most important roles are the ones you play when no one is watching.